This episode brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can get a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Halloween podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. Let me set the scene. A chill is in the air. The wind rustles through dry corn stalks. Out in the middle of the field stands a figure, arms stretched wide, face painted or stitched into a crooked grin. It doesn't move, but it feels like it's watching. You know what I'm talking about. The Scarecrow. It's one of the most iconic symbols of fall and Halloween, right up there with black cats and jack-o'-lanterns. But the Scarecrow wasn't always a spooky decoration. Long before it made its way into haunted corn mazes and horror films, the Scarecrow had a job to do. For thousands of years, scarecrows have been used all around the world to do exactly what their name suggests: scare crows. These humble figures were placed in fields to protect crops from birds and other pests. But along the way, they picked up some baggage: superstition, folklore, even a little fear. And eventually, they evolved into something else entirely: a symbol of isolation, of silence, and sometimes something sinister. In this episode, we're digging into the real history of scarecrows. From ancient farms along the Nile to the creepy cornfields of modern horror movies, we'll look at how these straw-stuffed guardians became part of the Halloween tradition. We'll talk about their origins, their meaning, and why they've gone from protectors of the harvest to some of the creepiest figures in pop culture. So grab your flannel and your pitchfork, just in case, and let's head into the fields. Before scarecrows ever made their way into Halloween yards or haunted corn mazes, they served a much simpler purpose: protecting crops. And believe it or not, almost every ancient civilization had some version of the scarecrow. Let's start in ancient Egypt. Along the Nile River, farmers grew wheat and barley, prime targets for hungry flocks of birds. To protect their crops, the Egyptians built wooden frames, draped them in nets, and perched them out in the fields. When birds landed, the netting would catch them. These were some of the earliest scarecrow-like contraptions, built not just to scare birds, but to actually trap them. Over in ancient Greece, scarecrows took a different form. Greek farmers carved wooden statues to resemble Priapus, a minor god of fertility and gardens. He wasn't exactly a handsome figure. He was said to be ugly and grotesque, with exaggerated features that would scare birds away. They'd place these statues in vineyards to protect the grapes. The Romans picked up on this idea too, spreading the concept across their empire. In feudal Japan, farmers built kakashi, scarecrows made of old rags, straw, and bamboo. They were often dressed in farmers' clothing, with hats, cloaks, and sometimes even fake weapons like scythes or bows. The Japanese didn't just use scarecrows to scare birds. They believed these figures could ward off harmful spirits as well. Kakashi were sometimes burned after harvest in ritual ceremonies to honor their service. In Germany, early farmers created figures called Butzemann, or bogeyman, to stand watch over their crops. They'd be made of straw and old clothes, eerily human-like, even centuries ago. In the Americas, before European colonization, Native American tribes used different methods. The Zuni people of the American Southwest placed children in the fields to shout and wave at birds. Some tribes hung fish from poles to scare off animals, while others used carved wooden figures or dolls. By the time scarecrows made their way into medieval Europe, the form we're most familiar with had started to take shape. Wooden frames with stuffed clothes, set up to resemble a human figure. And while their job was still to scare crows, over time, their stillness, their emptiness, it unsettled people. The scarecrow became a symbol not just of work and harvest, but of loneliness, of the uncanny. So, while cultures around the world had their own methods and beliefs, the scarecrow has always walked the line between practical tool and eerie figure. It's no wonder they eventually crept into our stories and traditions. When European settlers first came to North America, they brought with them many old world traditions, including the use of scarecrows. But just like everything else in the New World, the idea evolved. In colonial America, farming was life, and keeping birds and pests away from crops was critical to survival. At first, settlers used traditional scarecrows like they had back in Europe, crossed sticks dressed in worn-out clothing, propped up in fields to mimic the human form. But different environments and needs led to different tactics, especially in rural communities. In the early days of American farming, especially before the widespread use of fencing and pesticides, birds like crows and blackbirds were a serious problem. Farmers had to get creative. Some used shiny objects like strips of cloth or pie tins to catch sunlight and startle birds. Others hung dead birds or animal carcasses in trees. Grisly, but it worked. Still, the classic scarecrow remained a go-to solution, cheap, simple, and oddly effective. In the southern colonies, enslaved people and field hands were often tasked with manually scaring birds from the crops. They'd walk the rows during the day, waving their arms or shouting to frighten off intruders. This practice was even passed on to children in some communities, a grim reminder of the human labor that predated mechanical tools. By the 1800s, scarecrows had become a fixture of the American landscape, particularly in the Midwest, where corn and wheat fields stretched for miles. These weren't fancy or decorative. They were rough and utilitarian, wooden frames dressed in burlap, worn-out flannel shirts, and straw hats. Some even had tin pans or bells attached to make noise when the wind blew. Others had faces painted on sacks or carved into wood. But even with all these variations, one thing stayed the same. The scarecrow stood alone, season after season, quietly watching. Fast forward to the 20th century, and things start to change. As farming became more industrialized, scarecrows slowly began to disappear. New technology, tractors, pesticides, and automated deterrent systems meant fewer farmers relied on old-fashioned scarecrows. Motion-activated sprinklers, netting, and reflective tape did the job faster and more reliably. By the 1950s, scarecrows were fading from fields and finding a new home, decoration. Around this time, especially in small towns and farming communities, scarecrows started showing up during harvest festivals. They were no longer tools of the trade. They were symbols, a nod to the past. You'd find them on porches, leaning against hay bales, or decorating town squares during fall celebrations. Local contests were even held to see who could build the most creative or lifelike scarecrow. As Halloween gained popularity in the US, especially in the post-war era, scarecrows became part of the spooky season. Their stitched faces, button eyes, and stiff straw limbs made them perfect for October decoration. They weren't just cute anymore. They could be creepy, especially when placed in front yards, dimly lit from below, or hiding in a corn maze just waiting for someone to walk by. It was during this transformation, from agricultural tool to seasonal symbol, that the scarecrow took on its dual identity. In one moment, it's a friendly reminder of fall. In the next, it's the silent, sinister figure standing at the edge of the field, just outside the glow of your porch light. Even now, if you drive through the countryside in October, you're likely to see them. Scarecrows dressed like farmers, witches, skeletons, or sometimes just blank-eyed figures with stitched mouths and a little too much personality. They've gone from practical to symbolic, from forgotten to folklore, and now they're a permanent part of the Halloween landscape. So while modern agriculture may no longer need scarecrows, Halloween sure does.
This episode brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can get a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
There's something about scarecrows that goes beyond their job in the fields. Sure, they're built to scare birds, but let's be honest, they make us uneasy too. Throughout history, humans have had a weird relationship with human-like figures. Whether it's dolls, mannequins, or scarecrows, the idea of something that looks human but isn't quite has always triggered a strange sense of discomfort. Psychologists call it the uncanny valley, that unsettling feeling you get when something is almost human, but not quite right. And scarecrows? They live in that space, with stitched-on faces, outstretched arms, and lifeless glassy eyes. They blur the line between object and person. They're made to resemble us, but they don't move. They don't speak. They just watch. And that silence, that stillness, it's exactly why they become such powerful symbols in folklore and fear. In some parts of Europe, scarecrows weren't just tools. They were ritualistic. In Germany, some farmers believed that burning the scarecrow at the end of harvest could ward off evil spirits for the coming winter. In other places, it was believed that the scarecrow absorbed the spirit of the land during the growing season, essentially becoming a guardian of the crops, a being that needed to be respected. There's also something ancient about the concept of giving human form to the land. Some scholars believe scarecrows are modern echoes of older pagan traditions, harvest effigies used in fertility rites or seasonal celebrations. In those traditions, a figure, sometimes made of straw, might represent a harvest god or spirit, and was either honored or sacrificed at the end of the growing season to ensure future abundance. Even the materials used in scarecrows carry symbolic weight. Straw, the most common stuffing, is tied to death and rebirth. It's what's left over when life is harvested. It's dry, hollow, and fragile. A scarecrow is a dead figure built to protect the living. Another reason it feels a little ghostly. In some rural American traditions, people believe that scarecrows weren't just protectors from birds, but protectors from witches, bad luck, or even wandering spirits. There were stories of scarecrows that moved when no one was looking, or ones that seem to switch positions overnight. Sometimes, farmers would add charms or crosses to their scarecrows just in case. Then, there's the recurring theme of the watcher in the field. In folktales across cultures, there are stories of travelers who get lost in farmlands at night, only to realize they're being watched, not by a person, but by something that looks like one. Sometimes it's just the wind playing tricks. Other times, maybe not. Scarecrows also show up in rural ghost stories, where they're given supernatural qualities, coming to life, following people, or standing in places they shouldn't be. These tales tap into the fear of things that are supposed to be still, but are moving. By the time scarecrows became Halloween decorations, all this symbolism had soaked in. They weren't just cute rustic figures anymore. They were ominous, silent sentinels, tied to folklore, death, isolation, and the unknown. And honestly, that's what makes them perfect for Halloween. They represent the in-between. They're not alive, but not entirely dead. Not human, but not fully inanimate either. They just stand there, day and night, through wind and storm, watching. Always watching. It didn't take long for the Scarecrow to go from a tool of the farm to a star of the screen, and depending on how you first encountered them, they were either charming or absolutely nightmare fuel. Let's start on the friendly side. Probably the most famous Scarecrow in pop culture is the one from The Wizard of Oz. Introduced in L. Frank Baum's 1900 book and brought to life in the 1939 film, the Scarecrow was kind, goofy, and longing for a brain. He wasn't scary, he was lovable. For many kids, that version helped soften the image of scarecrows. He wasn't watching from the shadows, he was singing and dancing down the yellow brick road. But things get dark fast. In 1981, a made-for-TV horror film called Dark Night of the Scarecrow aired, and it changed everything. This was no goofy character with a floppy hat. This was vengeance from beyond the grave. The film follows a wrongfully accused man who's murdered by a group of vigilantes, only for a mysterious scarecrow to appear later, stalking the guilty one by one. It was slow, creepy, and ahead of its time, and it gave scarecrows a brand new horror identity. Then there's Harold. If you grew up with scary stories to tell in the dark, chances are you still remember that name. Alvin Schwartz's story about a scarecrow named Harold is short and chilling. Two farmers mistreat their handmade scarecrow, only to find it starts moving on its own. The final image, Harold stretching out a human skin to dry, is one of the most unforgettable scenes in kids' horror history. And when the story was brought to the big screen, in the 2019 Scary Stories film, Harold was front and center, rotting, groaning, and terrifying a whole new generation. Scarecrows also show up in other horror films like Husk in 2011, Night of the Scarecrow in 1995, and Scarecrows in 1988. They are often seen as cursed, possessed, or reanimated guardians of farmland who stalk and kill anyone who enters. Even Jeepers Creepers 2 opens with a scarecrow scene, one that turns out not to be a scarecrow at all. It's one of the most effective jump scares in early 2000s horror. And then there's Batman's villain, Dr. Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow. First introduced in 1941, this character doesn't wear straw or hang in a field, but he uses fear as a weapon. He dresses like a scarecrow, uses a fear-inducing gas, and turns his enemies' worst nightmares against them. He's proof that even in superhero worlds, the Scarecrow's association with fear still runs deep. In modern Halloween culture, Scarecrows have taken on a dual role. You'll still find the cutesy versions, smiling fabric dolls on hay bales, often dressed like friendly farmers. But more and more, we see the sinister kind: hollow eyes, twisted mouths, blood-stained flannel, and rusted pitchforks. Haunted attractions and Halloween stores lean hard into the horror version. They're tall, ragged, and silent, waiting in the corn for someone to get too close. They've also become popular mascots for rural haunts and corn mazes. Because really, what's scarier than walking into a dark cornfield at night and seeing a figure standing perfectly still? Or worse, realizing that one of them isn't fake? Scarecrows work so well in horror because they tap into primal fears. Fear of isolation, of something watching, of being alone in a place where no one can hear you scream. And unlike zombies or vampires, scarecrows don't have to move to be terrifying. Sometimes all it takes is knowing they're out there, waiting.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
You know, growing up, scarecrows were always part of the background. I never gave them much thought, but they were always there. Whether it was in a neighbor's yard, propped up in front of a gas station with hay bales and pumpkins, or tucked away in the seasonal aisle of a grocery store, scarecrows kind of just showed up every fall. I remember the first time I saw a really creepy one. It wasn't in a movie. It was at this small town fall festival I went to as a kid. They had this scarecrow contest. Each one was handmade by local families or businesses. Most were friendly looking, but one stood out. It was hunched over, face stitched with thick black yarn, and had these long straw arms that reached all the way to the ground. The thing just stared at you. It didn't blink, it didn't move, and yet it felt alive. I kept looking back at it, half expecting it to be in a different position each time I passed by. Years later, I saw that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark illustration of Harold, and it brought that same feeling rushing back. That weird mix of curiosity and unease. There's just something about scarecrows. Even when they're not meant to be scary, they look like they're guarding something or hiding something. Now that I'm older and surrounded by Halloween decorations every year, I've come to appreciate scarecrows a bit more. They're part of that perfect Halloween mix: harvest, folklore, and a little bit of fear. You can make them cute. You can make them terrifying. They fit just about anywhere. But no matter how you style them, they always bring a certain vibe, like they're watching, quietly keeping an eye on things. And honestly, I think they've earned their place right alongside black cats, witches, and ghosts. Maybe they didn't start out as a Halloween symbol, but over the years, they've become one. Not because they were meant to be scary, but because we looked at them long enough and realized how creepy they already were. So, what started as a simple solution to a farming problem has become something much bigger. The scarecrow has worn many faces: guardian of the harvest, ritual effigy, folk legend, Halloween mascot, and horror movie icon. It's a symbol of isolation, of protection, of fear, and folklore, all wrapped in old clothes and stuffed with straw. They've stood in fields for thousands of years, watching silently, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. Maybe that's why they've lasted so long in our imaginations. We project things onto them. loneliness, mystery, dread. And somehow, they've gone from practical farm tools to one of the most quietly unsettling figures of Halloween. But for all their spooky reputation, there's also something nostalgic about them. They remind us of fall festivals, crisp leaves, and the smell of harvest. They're as much a part of the season as pumpkins and chilly air. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the history of scarecrows. If you've ever built one, seen a creepy one in a haunted house, or have a favorite scarecrow scene from a movie or book, send it my way. I'd love to hear your stories. Just email me at thehalloweenpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out all the new stuff on our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com, including the new Halloween blog. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your Halloween-loving friends. Post it in your spooky groups, leave a review, or play it in the background while setting up your own front yard scarecrow this season. Until next time, keep your eyes on the fields, because some things are made to watch. Have a good night.
This episode brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can get a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.